I'm Bill O'Donnell, and welcome to another program on spirituality. Today I'm very excited and thrilled to have as my guest today the famous Father John Deere, one of the leading non-activists or non-violent activists in the country and in the world, and we're just glad to have him. So welcome, Father John.
Thanks, Bill.
Would you do us the honor of saying a prayer to get us started?
Sure. Well, beloved God of peace, we thank you for all the blessings of life and love and peace that you give us. Be with us as we reflect together on your call to be peacemakers, that we might be who you created us to be, your beloved sons and daughters. And we might ask this mighty blessing in the name of the nonviolent Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Father. Thank you. Well, it's a joy to be back here. I've been doing community television here for over 30 years, but this is probably one of my most distinguished guests. And he's well known in a lot of circles, but for the circles that don't know him, I'm going to get a chance to ask him a few questions about his life. And where do we start? Where were you born and raised?
I was born and raised in near Nags Head, North Carolina, in the Outer Banks. My father was the local newspaper publisher of the little tiny newspaper. My family had a big newspaper business all across the country. And I was born in 1959 on the edge of the 60s. And one of four boys, and my father's little paper came out in support of John Kennedy and Dr. King and the Civil Rights Movement, and so I saw the Klan.
You mentioned four boys. Which number are you?
I'm number 2.
Are you? Okay, I'm number 3 in a family of 5. Tell me about your parents again. Where were they from and how'd they get together?
Yeah, so my dad, this newspaper business, Deere Publications from Jersey City. My mom was a nurse in New York City. And they got married and moved to take over one of the family's newspapers, these rinky-dink papers, I call them. But because of his stand, he got some threats. And I was very aware early on about the Civil Rights Movement and Dr. King because we were politicized and right from get-go, growing up in a newspaper family. And it was the 60s, so even as a boy. But I also, North Carolina was less than 1% Catholic, and I went to a Catholic school, and the nuns, like everybody else, a lot of people had difficult problems. I grew up all day long. I'd come home singing a new Bob Dylan song or Pete Seeger song or Peter, Paul, and Mary, and finally my mother said, "What are those nuns teaching you?" That was my experience growing up.
What order were they?
I think Benedictine sisters.
Okay, I was a Benedictine myself. So all through elementary school, what was the name of your school?
No, so what happened was, well, this was in a town called Elizabeth City, where I later ended up in prison for my plowshares actions, like how the wheel comes around.
Yeah.
But I only lived there till I was about maybe 7 or 8. So my father's older brother was the head of the newspaper company, and also the head of the National Press Club. And he dropped dead of a heart attack in early 1967. And overnight, my father became the next in line, the head of the family business. We moved to D.C., and my father was very soon running the National Press Club as well. And I grew up in that. And literally in the press club, and I met a lot of people. I wasn't that impressed. And the Vietnam War was happening, the Civil Rights Movement, and even as a boy, I knew what was going on. But I also had a very great love of God and the church. I came out that way. So I was politically and spiritually aware.
Who of your family fathered or mothered that love of God?
Well, both of them, but I had 2 uncles who were priests, and my mother's side, they're all Brooklyn Irish Catholic mafia, and they were saints, and totally involved in the church, going back generations. But my father, who was Presbyterian, they were lovely, devout people too. It just was an unusual family, but I grew up a product of the 60s, of the best, and really admiring Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy as a boy, as an alternative. And then they were killed. And it changed my life. And that's why, partly why I'm here today, because
I believe you. How old were you when they died?
Well, I'm maybe 9, let's say.
Okay.
And it was Friday morning, April 5th, about 5 in the morning. My mother woke me up and said, "They killed Dr. King. You have to get up now." And that was very strange. And so I watched TV, and then my father said, I'm taking you, John, downtown, and we're going to see the curfew and the riot. So I saw that.
At 9, at the age of 9.
Yeah. And then he took me to see the Poor People's Campaign, and it was called Resurrection City. Remember all that? And then when I, even as a child with my family, put all these hopes in Robert Kennedy and what he was going to do to end the Vietnam War, and then he was killed. And I remember it was the last day of school, and I probably shouldn't tell you
That's
this,
good.
but since you're asking about my youth,
Yeah.
I loved school. I went to a very great Catholic school in elementary school in Bethesda, Maryland, and I loved everybody, all my friends in the whole neighborhood. They were all kids my age, and I was shaken. And we had the annual baseball game, the end of school game, which we look forward to all year. Yeah. And there was a big party, and I was shaken. I didn't understand this, and I was on third base, and a fight broke out, and.
In the stands or on the field?
On the field with my classmates. And I fell to the ground and was sobbing uncontrollably, and all the teachers came to me, and the fight went on. And I remember thinking, I mean, if my friends can't even get along, and we've killed Martin King and Bobby Kennedy in the Vietnam War, what is life going to be about in this world? And I went into an existential kind of depression for 10 years and went to Duke University to get away from the Catholic Church, a good Methodist school. And I was, went to a Jesuit high school and was very devout, but the death of Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy were critical for me. And when I went to Duke, and I was in a really wild fraternity, but we were
Which
all
one?
straight A's. I won't tell you. Straight A's.
I was a
really,
fraternity.
really crazy, but really smart. And I decided not to believe in God anymore, and to really work at that. And that didn't work. And I found myself even more depressed. And I was majoring in African American history and studying the civil rights movement, from slavery to the civil rights movement, Dr. King. And I thought, I couldn't get over death. And, nobody seems to have gotten around death. That was my stumbling block. Like, everybody's going to die. And I thought, well, if you don't believe in God, who cares? Make as much money, drink as much as you want, kill as many people as you want. Life has no meaning. But if there is a God, and if God is universally loving and compassionate and just and peaceful, and Jesus is the best face of that, well, I better get with the program, and I'm going to die, and this loving God is going to say, oh, I love you so much, welcome. And what did you do to help my suffering people? And just to cut to the chase, one day, it was Ash Wednesday, 1980, I was sitting in the basement of the fraternity house, and the light was coming through the window. I thought, of course I believe in God. Oh, of course I believe in Jesus. And it was happened this fast. I thought, well, then I have to give my whole life to God and Jesus. And without missing a beat, I thought, oh my God, I'm going to have to become a Jesuit.
Isn't that something?
And I saw my whole life in front of me, and here I am today, still trying to follow Jesus.
Yeah.
That was the first of two conversion moments I had in my life.
That's a great story. So, let's see, you were still at Duke as an undergraduate when this happened?
Yeah.
In the fraternity house?
Yeah.
So how did your life change from then on?
Completely.
What'd you do?
That was my question. I mean, so I felt like this is what I was being led to do, like a mother cat God picking me up and putting me over there. Do you know who Dr. Paul Farmer is?
Not by name.
He was a great famous doctor who just died recently. He was in the fraternity room next to me, and there was the subject of a famous book called Mountains Beyond Mountains. He also had a big conversion moment. I, started to pray, started to go to Mass. There was a Jesuit on campus. I went to see him, and, I applied, and I started serving the dying at Duke Hospital, and I started to really change my life. And then finally, I went to my parents and I said, I'm going to become a Jesuit. And they were appalled, as most people might be. And they begged me not to.
Oh, really?
And said, well, at least wait a year or two. You're just a kid. You're going to throw your whole life away. And
Because you're about, what, 20 now at this time?
I'm 20 years
Okay.
old. And so I said, okay, I'll wait 1 year and to think it out. And I got a job, oddly, for the Robert Kennedy Foundation, working for the Kennedys. And Mrs. Kennedy, who's 95, is still my friend. And I was the personal assistant as a dopey 21-year-old kid, just out of Duke, to David Hackett, Bobby Kennedy's best friend, who ran this foundation, which is now the Robert Kennedy Human Rights Award, a great organization run by Kerry Kennedy. That was helpful. I learned a lot being with him. And they only paid me $50 a week, which was so funny. Well, I had a little bit of money in those days, and I thought, well, what do I want to do? Because I'm going to enter the Jesuits August 1982. And I thought, well, before I give my life to this guy, Jesus, I want to get to know the lay of the land. So can I tell you what happened to me? So I finished working with David Hackett and the Kennedys. I go to my parents. I say, Mom, Dad, before I enter the Jesuits, I'm going to go hitchhike through Israel for 3 months to see where Jesus lived. And my mother went, it's worse than we thought. I know we'll get to talking about Dick McSorley.
Yeah.
Throughout this time, I'm meeting with him already. I'd known him since I was in high school.
Okay.
But we became very close friends. What happened was nothing I could have ever planned. And this is what changed. The week I left, Israel invaded Lebanon. It was the summer war of 1982. We've all forgotten about it now. And it was all orchestrated out of the Pentagon, and they called it Operation Peace for Galilee. And in that summer, 1982, through the U.S., Israel killed 60,000 people in Lebanon. And I flew on an empty airplane to Tel Aviv. Overnight, all the Holy Land tours were canceled. And I was a really dopey kid with a backpack to hitchhike. I was oblivious to everything. I camped out in Jerusalem, walked to Bethlehem, I made my way to Nazareth, and my whole goal was to go to the Sea of Galilee. I get to the Sea of Galilee, and there's nobody there, right? For miles, and it's changed a lot now. There's even McDonald's. There was nothing still then. And I'm camping out illegally by the water, just me and my Bible, for weeks. And I make my way slowly to the north side. There's a hill on the north side of the Sea of Galilee, and there's a little chapel there. And I go on a Wednesday afternoon, I make my way to the chapel, and I go into the chapel there, and there's nobody there. Is everything okay?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay. And I'm sorry, I'm so distracted.
No, it's okay. You're in the Galilee. You're going to the chapel.
So I walk into the chapel, and there on the wall of the chapel, overlooking the Sea of Galilee, it says, "Blessed are the poor." And then it says, "Blessed are those who mourn." And then it says, "Blessed are the meek, the gentle, and nonviolent." And then it says, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for justice." And over here it says, "Blessed are the merciful, blessed are the pure in heart, blessed are the peacemakers, blessed are those persecuted for working for justice." And on the altar it says, "Love your enemies," the chapel of the Beatitudes, which I had never thought about in my life before. And I was utterly overwhelmed. And I said out loud, alone in the chapel, "Oh my God, I think he's serious." And I walked out onto the balcony. And if you've been hitchhiking for several months by yourself as a dopey kid, you get wackier than usual. And I'm talking to God. And there's nobody for miles around. And it's this big blue Sea of Galilee and the hills, blue sky. It was a hot summer day. And I'm going, are you kidding me? My plan, I always joke, was to be a pious Jesuit, which you think is an oxymoron. But I was overwhelmed with the realization that this is what the poor guy wants us to do, to live out the Beatitudes and the Sermon on the Mount. All his teachings, blessed are the peacemakers, love your enemies. And I suddenly realized they were intended for me. I remember thinking, but isn't that what the bishop should be doing or the pope? Actually, it's taken me a lifetime to realize that the gospel is intended to be taken personally.
By us, yeah.
Each one of us individually.
Right.
So, being a dopey kid and scared to death, I said to God then and there, okay, I'm game. I'll give my whole life to the Sermon on the Mount, the blessed are the peacemakers and the Beatitudes, on one condition: if you give me a sign. And I'm saying, and all of a sudden there are these loud explosions, and 3 black Israeli jets fell from the sky, breaking the sound barrier with sonic booms. Boom, 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 and swooped down over the Sea of Galilee, over me. I almost fell over. I was so terrified. And I thought, right, okay, I'll work for that.
Watch out what you ask for.
Yeah, it's taken me a life, because that's why I spend my life working for peace, because of that moment. Now, you just humor me, and I've told that story to audiences and everybody laughs, but actually they killed a lot of people in Lebanon. And the next morning Lebanon was 15 miles away. I walked to the border. I was so dopey, and I was in the middle of the war zone, and I saw tanks like 30 yards long. I didn't know. I saw them rolling in and thousands of soldiers marching. I saw warfare at the place where Jesus said, love one another, love your enemies, blessed are the peacemakers. I just felt like I better go and tell the world that the teaching is not blessed are the war makers, but blessed are the peacemakers. And he's quite serious about this. And 2 weeks later, I entered the Jesuits and hit the ground running, and was with Dick McSorley and met Daniel and Philip Berrigan. I've never recovered. It's been downhill since, Bill.
You can use that story in your psychological evaluation, and you're going to get off with a warning. Anyhow, that was a great story. We've mentioned Dick McSorley several times, and the reason I brought him up is because I had the opportunity to interview him. You can see it on YouTube. Father Richard McSorley, the founder of Pax Christi. And I recommend you see that interview, because he talks about his whole life, and you sound just like him now, from what he was saying to me when he came to the College of Santa Fe one summer for the Santa Fe Institute for Spirituality, and taught us all this stuff that you're committed to. So it's been here in Santa Fe. Here we are in Santa Fe, New Mexico, the city of holy faith, nestled in the blood of Christ mountains. And a lot of things that you've said reflect on my own life of experience. So you're not as crazy as you might think.
Thank you.
Okay. We have a few more minutes left about your youth. Let's go back to your joining the Jesuits. What was that like at that time?
It was very exciting.
Say something about it.
Well, it's all still very exciting. You know, I felt at college I wanted to give my life to God, and because we're all going to die, there's nothing you can do. I consider that the 2 greatest people our country has ever produced, Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy, who were really trying to change the country and the world, we clearly killed them and got rid of them. And so I thought, well, there's nothing you can do. Then I go to the Sea of Galilee, and I felt, no, you're going to get out there and live my Sermon on the Mount and teach it. And so I entered the Jesuits a very different person than I applied. But you do 2 years in the Jesuit novitiate and 2 years of philosophy, and then I lived and worked in El Salvador with the Jesuits who were later assassinated. And I sat at the feet of Daniel Berrigan and Richard McSorley, 2 historic Jesuit figures and teachers of peace and nonviolence who'd had enormous lives. And Dan on the cover of Time magazine, and with his brother and Phil. But one of the things, well, first of all, they taught me Ignatian spirituality, which is all about, it's not brain surgery. You take time every day to be with Jesus. And that's what the Society of Jesus should be about. But it's very serious. From day one, you were expected to spend 30 to 60 minutes every day until this morning, quietly with Jesus. And I just talked to him about my life and the world and what's going on and my failings and the blessings he's given me and what he wants me to do. And even on the worst discouraging day, I feel energized, and Jesus saying to me, you're doing great, go back out there, love everybody, teach the Sermon on the Mount, and I will be with you. And So I learned so much and met these great people, and but it was the early 1980s, you know, and Ronald Reagan was really talking about nuclear war, and we were full on funding war in El Salvador and Nicaragua, and so I threw myself into every peace group in the country, from Pax Christi to Fellowship of Reconciliation, which I later became the head of, and if you're friends with Daniel Berrigan and Philip Berrigan, you have to get arrested and do civil disobedience. It's a requirement of friendship.
Yeah.
Philip told me to go and get arrested at the Pentagon, and I did, and now I've been arrested 85 times.
They taught here, by the way, when I was a Benedictine at Pecos, they came, and both the Berrigans and one of their wives came here as well.
Elizabeth McAllister, yeah. Dan remained a Jesuit till his death in 2016. Phil was a Josephite. Great people. But they were saying, not only do you have to teach the peace message of the gospel and the Sermon on the Mount and practice the nonviolence of Jesus and work and support a grassroots movement of peace, you and I need to be on the front lines. And some good people need to break bad laws which legalize the massacre of people in Vietnam and Central America and nuclear weapons. And John, you're going to jail. Wow, that was an education. And my first arrest was at the Pentagon, and then I think that my second was with Dan at Riverside Research Institute in Manhattan, right in Times Square. It was the leftover of the Manhattan Project. So they were studying high-end post-nuclear laser beam warfare. And we used to get arrested there liturgically at Christmas, Easter, Good Friday, you know, Hiroshima Day, and it was just every 3 months we got arrested and spent a few days in jail. Eventually they closed the place because of us, because you can't keep running business as usual and they were hiding out in a tall apartment building. Nobody knew that nuclear weapons research, but we would shut the building down. But anyway, it's been an adventure ever since, is what I'm trying to say.
Just for the people around here where you're from, tell us about your coming to New Mexico as a priest and what you did while you were here.
Sure. Well, briefly, the main traumatic thing for me was in 1985, living and working in a refugee camp in El Salvador under the directions of Acri and the Jesuits of the UCA, who were later massacred. And they were my friends. And they sent me into the war zone. And my sole job, I was like 24 with long blonde hair. When the death squads came into the camp to kill some of the refugees, I was the one to go out and talk to them. And the Jesuits were like, hopefully they'll kill you and we'll end the war. And
Did you have your collar on?
No, I mean, and talk about learning nonviolence quickly. They like threw me to the dogs, and I'd go out and talking to death squads. And bombs are falling around us. It changed my life, and I've been in many war zones since, but that was formative. I worked in the soup kitchen and shelter in D.C., went to theology school in Berkeley, was really getting involved in the national peace movement then. And then I did a plowshares action with Philip Berrigan. We hammered on an F-15 nuclear fighter bomber in North Carolina. I faced 20 years in prison, and I did 9 months in a tiny cell near my hometown where I was born and raised. And
Local boy makes good.
right. Wow, it was a setback for my poor parents. And, you know, even the jailers knew me, everybody knew my father. So, and then you know, for my sabbatical year, I went and lived and worked in Belfast. And then I became the head of the Fellowship of Reconciliation, led a delegation of Nobel Peace Prize winners to Iraq. And then September 11th happened, and I became the coordinator of chaplains there. And that was so traumatic, I moved to New Mexico. And I came here in 2002, had a bunch of parishes way out near Oklahoma, real far away.
Who arranged that for you?
Well, the Jesuits and the Archdiocese and some priest friends.
Yeah.
And then I started the annual Peace Vigil at Los Alamos, and that was my downfall. I was speaking out for peace, and that didn't go over well with the Archdiocese of Santa Fe. And just to wrap that up, eventually the Iraq War was going on in the 2000s, and I was inundated with requests to speak. So I was making 3 trips a week around the country, and I stepped down after several years from the parishes just to speak full on.
Right.
And yeah, and here I am, happy to be here with you.
Okay, hold that thought. This is coming to the very end of part 1. We'll be coming back in a few minutes to start to part 2, but you've really brought us up to speed. And so you've done a good job with it. Whatever we haven't covered in this one, hopefully you'll check in on part 2. We'll see this originally will air in Santa Fe Community Television, then hopefully on the internet for all those who are probably watching it now. So on behalf of everybody here at Spirituality TV, I'm Bill O'Donnell. On behalf of Father John and all the people helping, Bill Garcia and Alan O'Carp and Casey Ryan and our director, George Marvin, I want to thank you for viewing, and stay tuned next week for the second part of our interview with Father John Deere. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill.